We shall now proceed with the main plenary session on banking in a time of uncertainty. I would like to call upon Mr. K.R. Kamath, Chairman, Indian Banks Association and Chairman and Managing Director, Punjab National Bank, to kindly proceed over the session. Other panelists for this session are Mrs. V.R. Iyer, Honorary Secretary and Chairperson and Managing Director, Bank of India, Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, Chairperson, State Bank of India, Mr. S.S. Mundra, Chairman and Managing Director, Bank of Baroda, Mr. M. Narendra, CMD, Indian Overseas Bank, Ms. Chanda Kochar, Managing Director and CEO, ICICI Bank, Ms. Shikha Sharma, Managing Director and CEO, Axis Bank, Mr. Aditya Puri, Deputy Chairman, Indian Banks Association and Managing Director, HDFC Bank, Mr. Sunil Kaushal, Regional Chief Executive, India and South Asia, Standard Chartered Bank. Request all the panel members to please join us on stage. I'd also request Mr. Rennie Thomas, Director, McKinsey & Company, to please join us on stage and present a theme address on this topic. Over to you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you so much. I'd request Mr. K.R. Kamath to kindly initiate the discussion. Thank you.
Good morning to all of you. We are into business now. The Indian banking sector has remained structurally strong and been a pillar of stability in a tumultuous period in banking. Over the last decade, it has made strong progress in improving access, maintaining stability, and creating value. Financial exclusion has reduced from 51% to 35%. Net NPAs have reduced from 60%, by 60%, from 4.4% to 1.7% of loans. And the total return to shareholders, 3 years compounded average growth rate, has increased by 55%. However, in the last 3 years, there has been a sharp decline in banking outcomes, and this has resurfaced the debate on the role and contributions of the banking sector in the overall economy. There has been a sharp decline in the metrics related to stability, value creation, and growth. NPAs have increased 55%, from 1.1% to 1.7%. Total return to shareholders, 3-year CAGR, has reduced by 25%, and credit growth has slowed by 15%. In addition, sharp differences in performance and capabilities across banks in the industry have come to the fore. For example, the best performing banks already have more than 40% active customers on internet and more than 10% on mobile. There is also more than 95% difference in adoption of digital channels across top and bottom performing banks. And there is a 60% gap in gross NPAs between the industry average and top performers. The experience from a period of slowdown for the economy and for the banking sector in the early 2000s showed that the sector responded with a whole array of new capabilities and innovations. Widespread introduction of ATMs, direct sales agents, call centers, industry utilities, many of these are taken as given today. Now again, there is huge value at stake for the banking sector to build capabilities to successfully navigate through the current environment and reach a more favorable banking scenario by 2020. Capital infusion of INR 2,000 to 2,500 billion is needed to support growth of the banking sector over the next 5 years. In the most favorable scenario, the banking sector profit pool can potentially grow 3 times the current value, but can be as low as 2 times if favorable scenario doesn't pan out. Policymakers need to implement reforms and banks need to innovate to reimagine banking in India to ensure the sector is well positioned to support economic growth over the next 5 to 7 years. Banks need to build capabilities along one or more of the 3 dimensions: customer insights and propositions, low cost and multi-channel distribution, and agile risk architecture to capture the value at stake. In addition, a robust HR framework with best-in-class process for talent management and capability building is needed to support differentiation across these three axes. Now, in this background, we are holding the first plenary session, which hovers around the theme of the conference. I'm assisted by a very heavy panel here. I don't think I need to introduce them. I will not do that. But before we do it, I would request Reni to make a presentation. Somewhere it was told that when the people say it's a challenging year, the Chinese say it's an interesting year. So in the Chinese way, we are going through a very interesting year. And I would request Mr. Reni to make his presentation as a prelude to this panel discussion. Over to you, Reni.
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. Respected members of this esteemed panel, senior banking executives, and delegates at this truly landmark BanCon event, a very good morning. It's truly an honor and privilege to be here. I start by saying that the Indian banking sector has been a pillar of stability in a global banking sector which has seen a really tumultuous period. However, having said that, the next 2 years represent a critical period of navigating through these turbulent times. However, as we've seen, the banking sector has done this before. 10 years back, when we went through probably even worse times, the banking sector responded with a whole bunch of new capabilities and new innovations, which fundamentally drove banking growth over the next several years. Our sense of these new capabilities could be executed across several dimensions, whether it be around banking infrastructure, leveraging digital, greater insight into customer propositions and new segments, strengthening risk, and more importantly, also rebuilding human capital. I'm going to spend a few minutes bringing some color to some of these points. A banking sector in many ways can be evaluated, if you may, across 5 of several dimensions. The first is access, the ability to reach people. Second is efficiency, the ability to reach these customers in a cost-effective manner. Third is around stability, the ability to keep intermediate between the lenders and the depositors in an effective manner. The fourth is returning value to shareholders and invest in the banking sector. And fifth, growth and the contribution to value added to the GDP. Across all of these metrics for the last 10 years, the banking sector in India has done admirably well. The loans to GDP as a measure of penetrations has doubled from 0.29 to 0.59. Product penetrations has also doubled. And financial exclusion, if you may, has reduced by nearly 30%. Cost to income ratios have improved even further. The banking sector is well capitalized and reasonably profitable, even though it's been declining over the last few years. Growth remains strong. If you look at one metric, for example, around cost efficiency, Indian banks compared to banks across the world are amongst the most cost efficient at cost income ratios in the early 40s. This is something for the banking sector to be proud of. However, over the last 3 years, they've been in line with the slowdown in the economy. We've seen a sharp downtrend on some metrics. This includes metrics around efficiency, but more importantly, around NPAs, and has resulted in a slowdown in the value creation for shareholders in this particular period. In addition, to support the growth of the banking sector, the sector will need roughly 2,000 to 2,500 billion of capital over the next 5 years. And 40% of this will have to come from the government in case the current shareholding structure of the industry remains as is. While this might seem daunting, this has been done in the past. If you look at a period between 1999 and 2003, the gross NPAs in the banking sector in India ranged from 14.6 to 8.8, and net NPAs from 7.5 to 4.4. And in that period, we saw a whole bunch of new capabilities, new innovations, a whole range of successful execution, whether it be across payment platforms, the NEFT, RTGS, whether it was creation of ATMs. 30,000 ATMs were installed in a period of 4 years, whether it be introduction of new channels at the call centers, point of sale terminals. All of this today are taken as granted by customers in several parts of the country. So where do we go from here, given this backdrop? If you look at this page, on the horizontal axis is the revenue growth over the last 3 years, and the vertical axis, the return on equity. If you look at the shift between 2003 to 2010 and now 2013, there has been a decline in profitability. The banking sector has seen much lower returns. Now, the sector from here can go one of many ways. And to illustrate that, I'll illustrate 3 possible scenarios. One is what we'd call constrained evolution. The banking sector drifts along, reducing profitability, and leads to an outcome where the ROEs remain roughly around 12 to 13%. That definitely is not a favorable outcome. The potentially worst scenario, the banking sector could see further decline in asset quality. This is something that we want to actually avoid. The more favorable outcome is one through proactive and continued reform and proactive innovation by the banking sector. We're able to navigate through the next 2 to 3 years without a lot of further decline, and however, come out much stronger with a more profitable banking sector by 2020. The differences in these scenarios are pretty dramatic. The profitability could range from being 2,000 billion in the least favorable scenario to one which is as high as 3,000 billion for the banking industry. The return on equities could decline to 12.5% in a less favorable scenario to one which is a healthy 17%. So what needs to be done? Continued reform and continued successful execution of a whole bunch of areas, and I'll highlight 3 or 4 of these. The first is around newer customer insights on segments that are potentially underserved, SMEs, the mass market, both rural and urban. Second, reinventing infrastructure, particularly physical networks, using digital and other technology. Third, building a more robust and agile risk architecture, particularly to serve segments that are seen risky today. And finally, and more importantly, really rebuilding human capital. To illustrate these points, I'm going to play back some of the research we've done across 20 banks, 10,000 employees, and 800 SME customers. What you see on this page is the period between 2007 and 2011. The use of ATM channels in terms of active customers using ATM channels doubled. So roughly, on an average, customers visited an ATM 3 times a month amongst active customers. However, between the period between 2011 and 13, that has actually plateaued for the banking industry. In the same period, however, we're seeing a 10x increase in the use of the internet and the mobile channel for active customers. In fact, it is almost bordering 1 to 2 transactions per month for each of internet and the mobile for active customers in India. However, this varies dramatically. The potential can be seen by looking at the top quartile of banks in terms of active customers. So the top quartile of banks in the survey had 73% of customers active on ATM, 43% of the internet, and 4% of the mobile. And in terms of usage per active customer, as high as 2.5 transactions per month on the internet and over 2 transactions per month on the mobile. And that contrasts to the bottom quartile, where it is significantly lower. So huge gaps, and that actually shows the potential that's available for the banking sector. Even for SME customers, the survey revealed across these 800 existing customers, SME customers of banks in India, the usage of the alternate channel, interestingly, now exceeds that of the traditional channel. While the branch still remains the most important channel for SMEs, the usage of the internet for information, for mobile, and the call center has actually dramatically increased over the last few years. And if you look across the world, we are seeing several innovations around digital. We're seeing banks, while having branches, leveraging the alternate channels much, much more aggressively. Banks which allow customers to walk in and walk out of the branch in 20 minutes with the mobile, with their account and app on their mobile, with a debit card in 20 minutes. Also being able to reach out to remote relationship managers, remote sales service people, and also do this, all of this at a much lower cost. In fact, in the digital gallery outside, some of you may have a chance to look at some of these existing banks that are actually beginning to revolutionize banking using digital. Coming to segments, 2/3 of borrowing by SMEs in India is from non-banks. And if you ask the reasons why, it ranges between 1 of 4 reasons. Whether the banks require more collateral than they can give, or if they've used up all their credit lines, or they find the interest rates too high, or the documentation cumbersome. This unmet need represents roughly 4.5 trillion of outstanding loans. and there's a huge opportunity. If you look at the mass market, both in rural and urban India, money lenders remain the primary source of lending. And the typical lenders, for example, when we did our research, include people like a local Pathan who charges 10% flat, or a money lender, a jeweler, charging between 2.5% to 3% per month flat, which corresponds to 50 to 60% of annual APR. These segments are largely underserved by the formal banking channels. If we look again for inspirations, we do see a new generation of relationship-based community banks which have been successfully able to tap the mass market in emerging economies. And these models actually turn modern retail banking on its head and actually insist on actually building a local relationship with a mass market customer to be able to fully understand the cash flow and the borrowing needs of the individual customer, incentivize salespeople, not when they disperse money, but when they actually collect money back, and also ensure enough information based on qualitative factors to be able to assess risk. Finally, moving on to human capital. In our survey of 10,000 employees across public and private sector banks in India, what we saw is over the next 3 to 4 years, 50% of senior banking leaders in the public sector and roughly 20% in the private sector banks will retire. This will actually leave a fairly big leadership vacuum. And then we look at how banks are gearing up to meet this. We see significant variations. If you take a metric as the trainers that banks have already put in place, the variation between the number of trainers per 1,000 employees in the top quartile of the sample of banks varied from as high as 52 to about 0.1 in the bottom quartile. So as we think of these leadership vacuums, really investing in human capital will be quite critical. Banks will need to rethink and retool their human capital to lead their sector through this, lead the bank through these turbulent times. I close by saying that the banking sector has been a pillar of stability. I mean, the next 2 years are pretty pivotal. However, the banking sector, as done in the past, can respond by executing on a whole range of capabilities and innovations to capture the huge value at stake for banking India. Thank you.
Thank you, Reni. I have exactly 1 hour with me now. I need to close this session at 12:45. So I have framed 8 questions which are hovering around the themes of various subsections which will happen now. I would request all my panelists to be brief and take 3 or 4 minutes, but not more than 5, so that I spend some time for the people to ask questions. So let me start with Mr. Aditya Puri. Now, given all these uncertainties, given that what we are supposed to achieve, and the FM has also said that what should be the future of the bank, what, according to you, which are the new capabilities and innovations should the banking sector focus on in the next few years?
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. Good morning, colleagues. I'll try and be as brief as possible. So if we look at, we've identified about 4 items that we can all focus on in a reasonably quick manner and achieve the appropriate results. Firstly, rural and semi-urban India still accounts for 60% of India's population. Clearly, it is underbanked, underserviced by the organized sector, and it's a major opportunity for us. In order to be able to access this segment, we need to move from a product-centric to a customer-centric approach, which means we have to change the way we do our operations, credit, collections, distribution, marketing, and technology. Just to give you an illustration, as you go inside, you may not have the bandwidth, so you may have to use a virtual PC. You have to have mobile banking because the customers are very widely dispersed. You have to substantially reduce your costs because if you have a wide dispersion of customers, the amount of business that you will get per area will be reduced. So when you do this, what you really have to see is if you have a ticket size is small, credit information is not available, customers are dispersed, you need a complete change in your model. But I assure you, we've gone through it, we've been going through it for the last 3 years, and it's the best decision that we took, and it's turning out to be very, very profitable and a growth area. We also must understand that India's GDP is approximately 55% consumption. So most banks should, if they want to straddle the GDP, have 50% in consumer lending. That's another area that we clearly need to figure out. As far as whether you call it the second area, the virtualization or the digitization or whatever you want to call it, if there is a substantial demographic change, the younger lot actually, they're bloody addicted to this phone and PC, and they're fast losing track with the real world. If you plan to be a major player, then you have to understand that you have to offer on the bank what we call virtualization, that is on direct banking channels. He should be able to get the complete range of services that are available to him if he was sitting in the branch. Simplistically, the goal that I've set is that if he wants to deal with you digitally or through a direct banking channel, it should be as easy for him in terms of navigating your website, which is like a store, and then coming on to net banking, which is when the salesman is selling to him. But this is easier said than done. To make this effective, what you need is the appropriate backup. So you need a data warehouse, you need a repository, you need CRM management, you need analytics, you need campaign management, you need an appropriate access point to ensure delivery as well as comfort with what he is happy with. As far as urban India is concerned, as we move forward, the key issues will be service, product range, and in service I include both in terms of providing the fastest turnaround time at the right price and delivering to him what he wants, where he wants, and when he wants it. We also have an issue in terms of the development of markets where the regulator can help us. We do need the bond, currency, and derivative markets, because without that, we cannot move into the next stage. We cannot go through all these areas without assistance from the regulator. So everybody likes to beat up the bank that your recovery agent has done this, or you are pushing the guy too hard for recovery. For Christ's sake, it's not my money. I lend you money, you damn well pay it back. So we need a substantial improvement in the laws in this country. And then they want to compare us internationally. I have Alok sitting here. I'm glad he's compared us internationally, because he's a good Indian with an American background. But the fact of the matter is, can we also, let's not have the bankers as a whipping boy for everything. You need a good legal system whereby if you don't pay, I go to the court and I get my money in 10 days, or he's directed. So you can't have a situation that you take higher risk without appropriate legal system. We also need the SLR, CRR, priority sector, financial inclusion cost, whether this is to be borne purely by the bank or you allow the bank to create viable models. We also need to understand that our capital adequacy cannot be more stringent than Basel III, because otherwise we will not be able to provide return on equity, and consequently we will not get the capital that is required from overseas. Most importantly, much as I like to feel I'm important, all this can only happen when we talk banking industry, we're talking public sector. That's where 70% is. So if you want a change in the banking industry, I can make a lot of noise, but the real change can only come when you people embrace this. And probably I have to say our competition is increasing on a daily basis, but the scale will come from the public sector. And they probably need a lot of help from the government in terms of salaries. I'm making a pitch for you now, Mr. Kamath. In terms of salaries, expertise, promotions, non-interference, etc. And last but not the least, coming to the McKinsey report, because the regulators, and we have some of them sitting here, tend to catch on, our cost of intermediation is among the lowest in the world. When you take 4%, you say is our cost of intermediation. Please understand, you're comparing it where in the rest of the world, the margin is after provisioning. If you take margin after provisioning for Indian banks and you take the cost of SLR, CRR, you will come down to 2.4%. So, please don't ask us to give too many freebies. We are poor people to begin with. So we understand that we are in a poor country, but free ATM, it's a road. Do you not pay for a toll road? Why should we give free ATM? So that's one aspect that between McKinsey and the IBA, Mr. Ramakrishna is here, we can look at it. Secondly, we have to see clearly that we talk about cost to revenue. If you adjust it for our costs of financial inclusion and the costs of going into the interior, then we are among the best in the world. Of course, there's scope for improvement, but let's not beat up. We all bankers work very hard. So let's recognize that. So that is another area that we need to look at clearly. And when we are comparing ourselves, please don't compare us with city-states. We will never have the same ratios as Singapore or Hong Kong. Can we be compared to Brazil? I think I've probably taken enough time. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. I think you have drawn a list what is to be done. Most of the time, it's not that we don't know what is to be done, but we don't know who has to do it. That's the problem. Now I move on to you, Shikha now. The governor said, today the FM said, differentiated license is good. I know you have a strong view on this, so I thought I'll ask you that who should lead the innovations in the banking industry? Of course, Aditya has thrown the ball to us, 70% of the public sector, but I would like to make it a larger one. Should the existing bank lead the innovations, or do we want specialist players to come in to lead the innovations?
So I think FM also made the point that there are still unserved segments in the market. The McKinsey report said that as well. So I think one can't argue with the fact that you need different models of delivery for different needs. The issue is, how do you do that? Do you do that by having people who, having banks who have different competencies and capabilities who come in and play from those strengths? Or do you try and do that through a differentiated rules regime? I think the global evidence points to that. And actually the same McKinsey helped me with some data on looking at what has been the experience of global markets in terms of differentiated licensing. And there seems to be evidence to say that differentiated licensing based on ownership and capability works. But when you try and do it based on different rules and regulations, it inevitably leads to a financial crisis, because you end up with a non-level playing field and you create arbitrage, which becomes very difficult to compete with. So, does it make sense to have a new bank who understands farmers and can deal better with them? Of course it does. But I think the level playing field argument needs to stand. And in terms of innovation, I think innovation will come from everybody. So we saw today that there was a lot of innovation by existing banks. The number of entries was much, much larger than the people who were recognized. So I think innovation will come from profitable, strong banks who understand their customers and who have the nimbleness to innovate. And I would second what Aditya said. We will need a lot of help from the regulator to take an approach which is regulation plus development. Because if we regulate too micro and we say this is the way you have to do it, that's anti-innovation. You're going to have to, at a point, say these are the goals we want to go after. These are our broad objectives. Within that, allow banks to innovate and do things slightly differently. So I think a lot will have to be done by existing banks. There is definitely room for new banks. There's definitely a lot of help we can get from regulators. I would say that's not different rules for different people, but that's flexibility for all that we need from the regulator.
Thank you, Shikha. I fully agree with you that the innovation cannot be left only to the new players. The existing players will have to do it. I think if that is to be answered, Chanda should answer this because she won the award for the most innovative bank today. So, Chanda, for existing players, should this happen within the current organization, or you advocate a separate organization to be set up for innovation within the organization?
No, I think today innovation and use of technology is become an integral part of every aspect of the business. So innovation cannot sit outside of the organization or sit in a separate organization. In fact, the way we run our organization, we actually have made technology a part of various businesses. So every business in that sense owns technology. Every business thinks of what are the technology innovative steps that have to be taken, and technology becomes an enabler to actually make that happen, rather than sitting separately in different R&D labs and pursuing their own projects. So I think all these innovations, all the new ideas that we talk about have to happen not just in the same organization, but have to happen within each and every business. And when I mean business, again, it's not just the front office or the business. I think innovation takes place even at the back end. Innovation takes place in terms of how you manage your back end processing. Innovation takes place in terms of how you improve your sales office productivity. Innovation takes place in terms of what digital channels do you offer to the consumer. Innovation takes place in terms of what different products and services do you offer to your consumer. Just coming to the structure part of it, one thing is, as Shikha said, that when we talk of different entities, what we have to ensure is that the level playing field remains the same. So there may be entities who may want to focus on certain parts of banking. But what is banking? Banking is basically an equation which says you have access to deposits, you have access to insurance for deposits, you have access to payment systems. On the other hand, you have obligations of reserving requirements and obligations of priority sector. And I think this equation should be made equal for all players. Within that equation, somebody may want to focus on certain customer segments, somebody may want to focus on certain specific aspects of lending, but make the regulatory situation in such a way so that nobody creates an arbitrage on the regulatory side. Secondly, as far as every organization is concerned, if you even think of forming a separate entity, I think the reason for looking at a separate entity is that maybe you create a separate entity because it gives a specific focus to that activity. It may help you create a separate brand. It may help you formulate or work on separate cost structures. But at least our view has been that when an entity sets up separate structures, finally the cost structures tend to come and be similar to the parent entity. So I think the underlying part is that innovation straddles across the organization and that regulations should be common across every player. Within that, everybody will choose their models, their focus, and their ways of doing business.
Thank you. Now that you have put technology on the driver's seat, I turn to you, Mr. Mundra, now. Should technology players be allowed to trigger a digital innovation by playing a more central role in banking? What important boundary conditions should be kept in mind if the technology players will have to come in?
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. Good that you have asked a core technology question to a non-technology person. Because if it is given to a technology person, you will not be able to reach to any really visible outcome out of that. Anyway, having said that, I think I would start like this. Ultimately, what is banking today? I think banking has become a combination of finance, technology, hospitality, and risk management. Within that, if I look at the core components of banking, so let's say transaction and settlement, customer trust, service quality, managing risk, and brand equity. Now, why I am putting it? Because if you look at it, there are two areas which clearly, when we talk about the transaction and settlement, it is heavily led by technology, no doubt about it. When we come to risk management, element of technology is needed. But remaining three areas are clearly human areas. There is no technology which really can adequately meet these requirements. Now, if that is the case, the question is that till some time back, we were always believing that all the other activities of banking can go to different players, to the substitute. But there is one area which would remain sole preserve of bankers, and that was the transaction and settlement or payment and settlement. I think this belief is already broken. This myth is already broken. Today, with the advances in technology and particularly the advent of mobile banking and mobile technology, this sole preserve is going. So I think the fundamental question is whether there should be a parallel banking system or the technology operators can come into the space. Because all other things, I would say, the technology operators should certainly provide the supporting role. They can be in all the innovation, storage capacity, your core banking solution, cloud computing, all those things are there. But when it comes to the core of banking, whether they can be in the payment and settlement space, I think I would carry a big reservation. Because if we see very recently, I think there is a example in China, till recently, there was a virtual currency which had come up, which was known as QQ coin. And it has virtually threatened the valuation of RMB. So much of situation had come. And ultimately, I think regulators had to become aware about it. There is another similar parallel thing is floating in the world, and that is known as Bitcoins. Now, Bitcoin is reaching a proportion probably where the regulators in individual territories can't do anything about it. If you have to really regulate something like a Bitcoin, you have to have a global financial regulator. And I think we are struggling with within a nation, we are struggling that who should regulate whom and how many regulators should be there. So I think we are far away from a global regulator kind of thing. So all this being the situation, I would feel that the technology innovators, they should have major role, but not the central role. There could be three models. There could be a partnership by the regular bankers. There could be an acquisition by the regular bankers. And third, the situation which clearly is not acceptable. So this is how we should move in this direction. And I think regulators also have to view these things in the similar fashion. Boundaries, of course, the customer privacy. These are the clearly boundaries, regulatory compliance, KYC guidelines, and the securities. I think these are the prime concerns. And these can be met adequately only when this is a preserver banking system and the technology providers are coming with their innovation in a supporting role. Thank you.
Shika, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point there that technology providers coming into banking, the only thing one needs to worry about is that if the technology is a core infrastructure, which all banking will ride on. So for instance, if it's a telecom network and the telecom network is allowed to get into banking, then we would have created a huge conflict of interest, which we are already seeing a bit of evidence of, where banks are not being allowed to use the USSD capability. So there's a competition happening, and even though banks can benefit a whole lot from USSD by delivering, a cheap mobile banking solution, because of the ownership issue and the conflict of competition in the same space, we have a problem. So I think that's something that one needs to worry about as we think about what are the appropriate models.
Thank you. Now that we say that we are capable of handling it with partnership or by acquisition, there's a huge mass market available here, which is to be catered. Now I turn to you, Madam Arundhati. What is constraining service to the mass market? And how could this challenge be overcome? How could you overcome the challenges? Yeah.
Actually, if we go back to the FM speech, I think he was precisely pointing to this challenge. The challenge that we have so many people, and yet in spite of so many years of constant effort, we still don't seem to have even achieved 50% of financial inclusion. So obviously, if we are looking at the challenge in this manner, we have to innovate. And innovation obviously has to be in a manner that it becomes a viable model. I think Mr. Aditya Puri was also talking about the cost of financial inclusion. There is really a definite cost there. We need to recognize the cost. We also need to recognize that by not including the masses, that is by excluding them, actually we are putting a much vaster cost on them. If you walk into any of the wholesale markets, you will normally find one person standing at the gate of the market with a sheaf of notes and a little notebook. As people get in, they take 100 rupees from him, walk in and buy whatever they want to buy to sell in the retail space. End of the day, the same people come back and return 110 rupees. So therefore, you can imagine the interest that this person is paying at the rate of 10% per day. However, when we start the financial inclusion business, all of the costs are kept at a very low level because it is said that the people whom you are trying to bring in will not be able to afford it. But as a result, what happens is that the services we try to give, they become unviable. I think this is the first realization that we must have. That is that if we are to bring in a model that ensures that we bring banking to the masses, it has to be a viable model. We are talking about today, that is mass banking that we are talking about today, that it is done in a much better manner. Having said that, we also must realize that the numbers that we are talking about here are humongous. And therefore, all of these offerings must have a very solid underpinning of technology. And technology and communication, I think these are the two areas where we need to really concentrate to find out what would be the best models in order to bring about this kind of inclusion. I think India is blessed in a manner that technology costs over here are much cheaper than the rest of the country. I do believe that we need that freedom to be able to innovate here, bring about models that are viable, and then take them forward so that this inclusion that we have not been able to achieve in such a long period of time becomes a viable business model, and only then we can see its spread happening. One thing I remember, in earlier conferences, etc., we used to say that the only constant is change. Currently, I think the only certainty is uncertainty. And therefore, in these uncertain environments, the more you can include the numbers, more you can include the masses, the more diversified will be our risks. And therefore, there is no time like the present time for us to go into these markets and try and ensure that we get the models right, models which will be sustainable and yet those that will address the needs of these people. And therefore, only I think we can achieve what we have been trying to achieve for a very long time. Thank you.
Well, from the mass, there is another segment which is well diversified, as said by the FM, which is SME. Now it is over to Narendra. What steps could banks take to increase support to SMEs?
Thank you. I think quite a lot of have been discussed. I think in SME, or are we talking about in the ground level, in the micro area or the mass, we need to first of all orient ourselves. The basic issue is our human resources have to get themselves to the level of the local aspirations, the local requirements, and so creating the talent, skill, as well as orientation, particularly the positive approach at the human resource level. And some of us, when we pass through rural and semi-urban and area, and when we come up to the higher level, we must not forget that we have also passed through, and we need to know that how difficult it is and how to reach out to them. So the orientation of the people I consider as the first step. Second, an SME means you need to also create the requirement at the origination level, the infrastructural support, or in terms of the SME development, SME cluster development, in terms of knowing the complete activity. What is happening is we are uniformly making the same method of lending to everybody. So there needs to be total innovation, what we have been talking, and this innovation needs to be on an ongoing basis, and as mentioned here now, that has to be left to the ground level people. Our rules and regulations, our credit policies, all that needs to be empowered at the local level within the overall parameters. Again, this I think is not really taking place. Second, we need to get totally connected and engagement. That is again important, where unless we are engaged and connected in totality, what is happening is quite a lot of us think SME as a transactional value. It is not merely a financial transaction. It has got much, much higher. It so happens that those who are innovator or more forward, they are taking all the juice of that, whether it is a cash management, whether it is a factoring, whether it is a wealth management, whether it is a channel financing. And that has been brought out in the note that quite a lot of the banks who are also doing are not taking care of that. So how to have the necessary technology, necessary expertise? Of course, a few banks have done that, but that needs to be definitely. So the value addition is the one which the SME customers are looking. Currently, almost all uniformly, everybody knows, and of course, the report talks about customers with above 100 crores or 200 crores turnover. What we are talking about, the real first-time entrepreneurs also, as well as a few who are in the initial stage of development. The one area what banks have to give is the very, very first-time entrepreneur. Because if you are really talking about the manufacturing sector getting real boost, the new entrepreneur and as the young generation also need to be given in terms of the support. Then, of course, we need to have other windows for the SME sector, whether it is going to the international arena, providing a forum for other, their product development or technological development, or in terms of providing the access to the capital, and also have other services of venture capital fund or the trust fund account. Now, all they have been done. There are quite a lot, but these are all not completely interconnected. Everybody acts in their own isolation, but it has not been interconnected, either through the government agency or the private initiatives. There needs to be a coordinated and interconnected complete packages which has to be. And of course, who have taken the initiative also should provide to the industry. It cannot be provided in isolation to few. It has to be provided to the industry. So another thing is, now it is a time banks also to take some risk in underwriting, in providing as an anchor investor, in promoting them with a long-term plan to go into the SME exchanges. Maybe a few have come, but it has not been really taken in a full area. Now, even there are SMEs also need to have the corporate governance, their good accounting practices, benchmarking to the best. So the available agencies like the rating agencies, other developmental associations, the others all have to have a one type of sensitive analysis, as well as having each one to rise up to the occasion, so that the current environment where we are seeing uncertainty. But I am also a believer that there are quite a lot of SMEs who are unconnected with this uncertainty, and they are doing extremely well. And we find when an international MNC comes to India, they provide most support to their own enterprise from abroad. How many of the corporates are also taking enough care of the SMEs who are from at the remotest are providing? So in terms of that, another important is the underlying cash flow and the payment mechanism, and the fact that here the survival of the fittest, by which each one tries to exploit the other. So particularly in SME sector, it has been the exploitation, and they are not able to really get. So as rightly mentioned in the diversifying risks, we need to really go into that. One more thing is, there is nothing wrong in giving handholding, restructuring, repackaging, and wherever, of course, there are opportunities, even at the haircut, we should settle them, but we should not ban them from further credit. Again, there should be an opportunity for, everybody cannot be successful. But if he has the basic tenets of entrepreneurship, we must get them another opportunity. Of course, I know that the time is very precious, but I would like to make one just survey. This is the audience which is constituting maybe 100% of the business. So how many of you are really serious? Because whenever we talk financial inclusion and all, we talk in the metro or urban area, but real at the ground level, the activities are not coming. So I would like you to introspect and also give your nod that we are all definitely concerned with the SME and the micro sector, and we will give more importance in this challenging period for uplifting the mass market. Thank you.
Thank you, Narendra. I think we have set a broad agenda, what is to be done. But there are two major issues that will confront the banks in achieving this. One is capital, other is the human resources. So I turn to you, Mrs. Iyer, now on the capital. What measures could the banking industry take to meet the growing need for capital infusion?
Thank you, Mr. Kamath. All of us know that capital is required to support the growth in the banking sector. Credit to GDP ratio from the survey, we all saw that it is around 57%, an improvement from about 30% a decade ago. But all of us also know that India is one of the most underpenetrated nations. So in case we want to have the economic growth as we are all envisioning, then the credit to GDP ratio has to become almost 70-75%. So this presupposes and calls for a higher capital requirement. On the other hand, we also have the regulator insisting for the implementation of the Basel III in a phased manner and also tightening the various provisions such as on the restructured advances. So all this calls for the banking system to have a much, much higher amount of capital provision to be made, and from where the provision can come, it has to come from the profit we plow back ultimately. So what I'm trying to touch upon here is the innovation, technology, all the panel members talked about it. What we need to do is, for ensuring capital, there is no shortcuts. It is actually the profits which we need to earn. It has to be on a sustainable, increasing level, and that can happen only through the various innovation, which we have been talking on the business model side, on the process side, on leveraging technology, both for growth as well as for the cost minimization. But ultimately, all these things have got to be delivered only through HR, the human resources, and that is where we public sector banks are really facing a challenge, because today is not a day for the customers walking into your branch and giving you the business. We have got to go out and sell. And here, PSBs don't have a level playing field. I totally support and I'm happy that Mr. Puri said that we should be given more autonomy to pay salary, more autonomy to go to the institutes and recruit. I wish he had told this in front of the finance minister, you know. It would have made a lot of difference for us. Next time, Mr. Puri, make it a point to tell Mr. FM. Yeah, so having said that, the crux of the problem is for the value creation is the ultimate sustainable way we can have the increasing growth and increasing revenue, which is required for plowing back to the capital. So that is where we are, all of us are facing a constraint in the public sector side. Okay, given the, having said that, what we can do to improve the value creation is, there are, of course, I would always strongly recommend that we need to improve the risk management system. A taker has to be a risk manager. He cannot say that he will take the risk and keep quiet. He has to travel to the other end of the road and also recover money, or in case it recover income, or else if it becomes bad, to recover the money. So the entire chain from origination to the recovery, there is a lot of scope for improvement. Today, the monitoring and reporting is more of a routine. So that is a place where considerable improvement can be made so that we can sustain the income what we intended initially. It also presupposes that the loans which we originate needs to be structured properly. It needs to be priced properly. So I am very clear that if we don't price it properly, then you don't create value down the lane. The balance sheet growth cannot be at the cost of value minimization. Both have to go together. The balance sheet growth, the asset increase, every asset should contribute to the value maximization. For this, the PSBs especially, I'm sure the private sector banks must be much ahead of us. The measurement, we have to graduate to measuring the risk return of every asset we are investing. So the risk return orientation has to come. The measurements such as the RAROC or RORAC, the profitability of a portfolio, we need to look at. Generally, we don't do it, or else it is done at the risk management level and it lies there in the department of the head office. So more than the measurement part of it, we also require portfolio management. Portfolio which does not give you value maximization, you should know to exit from it or reduce it or take necessary steps to maximize it. So the measurement at every level is very important, because once you start measuring, you come to know the areas where you ought to improve, which will help you to value maximization, because only value maximization can give you good bottom line, and that can go to adding to the profit. Of course, if you don't have the adequate profit to be plowed back, of course, as many of us, the government of India does support us, and this is one of the sore questions, always the question asked by the analyst, that you're all totally dependent on the government. So this factor also needs to be kept in mind, that the government at the center also do have constraints, and it is for us to maximize the profit. Okay, apart from that, we have got other avenues. We can go to the capital market, we can go to the debt market to raise the capital through a variety of instruments. But here, we need to keep in mind the perspective of the equity investors, the perspective of the bond investors, because lot has changed. Lot has changed, because when we go to the market, because of the uncertainty and the volatility, the ratings demand a better rating if you want to have a good pricing. So these are the underlying factors which we have to keep in mind if we go to the equity market or to the debt market. So summing it up, you need to have a proper risk management, which will it should become a culture and DNA. It is not for simply regulatory compliance, but it should help you to place yourself competitively. It should help you to do the risk pricing properly. It should help you to look into your portfolio, and then accordingly you rephase or rebalance your portfolio so that you ensure capital efficiency and also profit maximization. So this is what I wanted to tell ultimately. Thank you.
Thank you for the focus on the risk management and the need to earn to plow back. Of course, there is a lot of pressure on the asset quality today, and a lot of provisions are being made. That also offers us an opportunity, because when the things happen for good, things change. All that recovery and the right back that happens, I think that will bring back a lot of capital, especially to the public sector, back into the system. I'm left with the last question, but very, very important question on the human resources goes to Sunil. What measures should the banking industry take to address the challenges of human capital shortage?
So like everybody, I will not directly answer the question, but I will tell you in how we see this issue. We see three things reshaping the banking sector. One is regulation, stroke compliance. The second one is returns. And the third one is technology. Clearly, for the current stock of people that we have, it is becoming hugely important to, one, train them and make them aware in terms of the returns. If you look at our sector over the last 4 or 5 years, the cost of capital or the amount of quantum of capital that one has to keep has almost doubled. Whereas returns are capped, one, by competition, and two, by the regulatory focus on the fee structure. So you've got this contradiction, so as to say, working towards reducing the returns. Secondly, there's an element of BAU cost increase that's taking place. So irrespective of what you do, there is a cost increase that is taking place. So in a scenario where you've got returns capped, fee structures coming under a lot of scrutiny, and costs going up, the understanding of the balance sheet, the understanding of how capital works is becoming even a more important issue, and that is where we are focusing in terms of training our current cadre of people so that they're able to focus on the right products, on the right services, and on the right client segments. So that's one part of it. The second one is on regulation and compliance. Just to give you a sense of, and coming from a foreign bank perspective, and there are a lot of banks here who've got international presence, large international presence, and there's aspiration of many banks, Indian banks, to go overseas in a big way. The cost of compliance has become huge. In the 10 years up to 2011, the fines on US banks was about $10 billion. In 2012, the fine went up to $29 billion. And in 2013, the fines are going to exceed $35 billion. So the cost and understanding of compliance is becoming hugely important, and that's where a lot of our efforts are going in terms of training people and picking up the right skill sets in that particular area, because it's not going to go away. That's going to be with us for a long period of time. The regulators are also taking out a lot of complexity out of banking, particularly on the retail bank. They're trying to make products, fees, etc. very, very simple. And that's where technology comes in. You will have, we haven't really seen to a very great extent in India, but disintermediation taking place from players who cherry pick their areas of participation, who are quite narrow focused, and they're able to kind of disrupt. We talk about technology as a huge enabler. Sure, it is a huge enabler, but at the same time, it can disrupt the current economics of doing business. And that is where we put a lot of emphasis in terms of getting the right set of people who understand technology well, who are able to appreciate what technology can do. For instance, just giving an example of what we do for some of the senior people is have them spend time in Silicon Valley or in the technology hubs or the innovation hubs of companies such as Samsung, so they understand the mindset and they understand what really is happening in terms of the new innovation, the new technology that's likely to disrupt the banking sector. And the banking sector could almost be, similar to what the recording industry went through, where you earlier went into a branch, you went into a record shop, chose your thing, product that you wanted, and purchased it, whereas now it's completely changed. Now you can buy it on the phone. You rarely walk into a record shop unless there is something very complex or you need a very, very specific advice on something. We don't see the Gen Y walking into branches and using them as extensively as, say, our generation or the past generation has done. So how do you equip your workforce and your business model to something which is going to be, a combination of brick and mortar and virtual going forward? To sum it up, I think we are trying to train our people to live with contradictions, because at the same time, there is no clear-cut path to this. You'll have to live with ambiguity as well as contradictions, and that's where I would stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I should thank all my panelists for keeping that time. We have taken exactly 45 minutes for this discussion, leaving 15 minutes for interaction with you. The floor is open. Yes. Can somebody take the mics?
Sir?
Yeah, I think, should I? Or?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that we have a panel of decision makers on banks, right? And there's been a lot of talk about inclusive banking, new models which are going to be created. But the kind of ambivalence which is there is that inclusive banking, priority sector lending has always been there. It has not been accomplished to the extent which we're talking about today. Why is it that banks have not really gone into this particular area? So, because if I look at it, actually I'm an economist, I'm not a banker, so I'm not quite sure how bank lending is done. Like there was a view given by SBI saying about the wholesale market where there's 100 rupees given and 110 rupees goes back. The reason why your MFIs actually came up was basically there's an unbankable or non-bankable class. So banks are obviously not able to lend for whatever reason, maybe collateral is required, whatever the processes are. And that's the reason why the MFIs came out, and we had those kind of controversies which came about, and therefore the whole thing has taken a turn. So today, if I can look at macro data, because individually when I talk to any banker, they always say that priority sector lending is very good, it's profitable, no problems as such. But if you look at RBI data, consolidated data on public sector banks, the NPA probabilities are much higher for priority sector lending. Okay? Very few banks actually admit it, because I've spoken to some of the CEOs and they say, look, my bank is doing very well, there's no issue as far as priority sector lending is. Now, given the fact that we have NPA issues across the banking system—
Come to the question, please.
No, I'm just saying, can you reconcile what gives us confidence that something which you all never did earlier for some whatever reasons, and now you're saying you're going to have new models for taking care of inclusive banking. So what's the guarantee that this kind of thing is going to happen, given the fact that NPAs tend to be high? That's the simple question. If something wasn't done in the past, there must have been reasons for it. So what gives us the confidence that it will be?
I think, that is exactly what I was talking about, that we need financially viable models. When you are looking at the NPAs in the priority sector, the reason for the NPAs is, in respect of all small advances, the connect is very, very important. And the connect is costly. Now, if you are going to do it within the public sector, for instance, we have very inflexible cost models, in the sense that what I pay to a person in the villages would also be the same that I would pay to a person sitting in Mumbai. Now, if you're going to need that many people in the villages, the entire model doesn't work out. The viability of the model doesn't work out. One way that we have been now able to sort of take care of it partways is because of the connectivity that we have managed through technology. But even then, the reason why I talked about financial viability of the model is that we have to have that little bit of extra space, little bit of extra elbow room, either in pricing the service or in paying the people. Without that, it is very difficult for us to do mass banking to the extent that it really extends to the deepest of the villages, to the extent that it covers the entire urban poor. All of these models are viable models, but we need that amount of regulatory forbearance, or that amount of the elbow room, as I said, the space to be able to do it viably. If we can't get a viable model, it is very difficult to sustain any initiative whatsoever. One of the reasons why, in spite of so many targets, many of the public sector banks, leave alone the private sector, the public sector banks that are bound to achieve these targets, many of them have not been able to achieve it merely because it is not sustainable. So we have to come back to the sustainability of it. Mass banking can happen, but it has to happen in a sustainable manner. And to that extent, while regulatory oversight is very necessary, and we see it is necessary when you see the kind of abuses that happened in the microfinance organizations, who were at one point of time self-regulated, but they had to be brought under regulations because there were people within that group who were actually abusing whatever they were doing. So while regulation oversight is necessary, micromanagement is what is not necessary, and we need to be able to have that room to enable us to get those viable models in. With the viable models in, I fully assure you, the banking sector can more than do its job in the priority sector area.
If I can just elaborate, on the specific point of saying that so many things were not done in the past and what makes us believe that they will be done in the future. I think you have to put in context that a lot of things in the ecosystem have been changing only in the recent past. And those are the enablers that have enabled the banks to create more and more viable models. Now, till a few years ago, the whole branching policy was restricted. Now you're able to open as many branches as you want and reach out to these areas. Till a few years ago, we were not allowed to use business correspondents. Now you have the ability to use business correspondents and extend your reach to these areas. The technology and the technological developments that have taken place in the last few years, again, have created a transformational impact to enable all of us to use these things. The whole concept of UID and making sure that now we can do eKYC, that is substantially changing the way we can reach, extend our reach to the unbanked. So I think if you put in context the way enabling factors have changed, I think it's in that context, the banks performed on financial inclusion given the ecosystem that was prevailing earlier. The banks are performing today in financial inclusion given the ecosystem and enablers that have been put in place now. And going forward, they will actually harness these enabling factors even more and do much more. So if you look at the number of financial inclusion accounts that have been added, the number of facilities that have been added on those in the last 2 years are probably equal to the amount that the banks have done in the last many, many years. And I think this number will only multiply as we go forward.
Yes.
As the Honorable Minister was pointing out, that most of the population in the...
Where is the question coming from?
Yeah.
Please stand up so that we can...
Yeah. I'm here. I'm too
okay. Yes.
Yeah. As the Honorable Minister was pointing out, that most of the population in the mass market or in the lower income group are yet to be brought under the fold of banking. So my question is to the entire panel, whether we can have a model wherein the majority players in the banking fraternity join hands and try to address this segment together rather than individually, so that this segment can be addressed as soon as possible, and all these people who are not yet in the fold of banking can be brought in the fold. Thank you.
I think, yeah, I'll just pass it on to Mundra, but I would like to say that I think all along we have been discussing that one-size-fits-all model may not work. Each one is to be allowed to innovate so that they come with different models, and whoever gets with the best model and the faster model will be in a position to reach out to the segment. I would request Mr. Mundra to add.
No, I will just add to what Mr. Kamath is telling. It may not be a great idea that 20-25 players pooling together and giving attention to only the one area. But in a systematic manner, if you look at it, the entire country, particularly for this segment, geographically it is decided. At individual village level or panchayat level, there are different banks which are handling this. So there is a collective effort. It's not that they are individual, unorganized effort. There is organized collective effort, but well distributed, and everyone is allowed to do the innovation, use one of the multiple channels available. So I think to my mind, the purpose is being achieved, and probably it achieves the purpose with much greater efficiency and innovation.
Thank you. I think Vinod Juneja, last question.
Sir, here. Sir, number one, I must compliment that you have really implemented the remark that latest company law, 40% are the women and 60% are the, must compliment that you have really implemented the new company law 2013. My only question to Mr. Sunil, that you were mentioning that you are sending your people to Silicon Valley or Samsung in Korea. Are you thinking something like Infosys or Tata to also send your people?
This is not to get nationalist here. I was just saying that one of the examples, as I said, in the US we do it. Obviously here we do it in Infosys, we do it with Wipro, everyone else. So you can be rest assured.
Sir, I have a last question, sir.
Yeah, where?
This is Yogesh from Money Life. I have two questions. We are talking about growing NPAs. Over the past 6 months, NPAs of 40 listed banks have gone to 1.38 lakh crore rupees. So my question is, what are the efforts all these bankers are taking to recover their dues from big defaulters? I mean, taking cue from Mr. Puri, I never heard that any recovery agent visiting Mr. Mallya. And my second question is, we are talking about financial inclusion. 50% population is still not in the financial inclusion system, or they are away from the banking system. So how you are going to implement the direct benefit transfer scheme? And is it feasible?
Regarding the direct benefit transfer scheme, it is feasible. In fact, in the last 1 quarter, we have opened 55 lakh accounts. So if it can be done in 1 quarter by one bank, with all the other banks also doing the same job, I think direct benefit transfer will become a reality. If not within the next quarter or 2 quarters, but very shortly, it should be a reality. And we do have currently the technology to help us do it. In respect of the efforts that are being made on NPA, there was a case that was talked about. While we would not like to talk specifics, but I can assure you that there are more than a dozen cases going on in respect of certain accounts. And other than the cases also, what is being currently done is, in respect of only those accounts where we are quite sure of the viability, they are restructured, they are taken to CDR. Besides the CDR, there are direct bilateral restructurings also, where we genuinely believe that there is a possibility that this particular unit, given time, will be able to generate enough cash flows to be able to service its debts. In respect of those accounts where there is no such viability or viability cannot be established, there is a very well laid down procedure, and those procedures are currently being followed. The reason why we do not see immediate action is because the legal challenges on each of these steps are many. And even, for instance, if I can tell you, SARFAESI is supposed to be under DRT and DRAT. However, we are finding that even when you send a SARFAESI notice, they are able to get injunctions from any courts of the land, including labor courts. They also give a notice, which of course we can afford to ignore, but which we, being in the public sector, we would also go and defend this and try and get it vacated. Now, all of these things take time. It is not something that happens just the other day. But if you look at the recovery figures of all the bank, you will see that the recoveries are also quite large. However, it is true that the entries into NPA are much higher than the recoveries. But this is symptomatic of the economic environment. As Mr. Kamath just said, that should the economy turn around, you will see a reverse flow. You will see more recovery than NPAs being added. So it is not something that is out of the way. It is symptomatic of the economy. If the body is sick, you will have fever. You cannot be without it. So that being the case, these things are definitely getting a lot of attention from the banks, and various ways and means, whether they be one-on-one negotiations, whether they be one-time settlements, whether they be through the SARFAESI Act, all of these things are receiving attention from every single bank.
Thank you. I think...
because he had two questions.
Yeah.
No, first of all, I think I must compliment you, because you are representing the national consciousness on banks' asset quality and financial inclusion, which has become quite a nationwide phenomena. Just to supplement what Madam just said, see, the NPAs which we witness today, they are also a evaluation of the economic conditions or the other external factors which has happened in the economy. And resolution is not always lying only in that I send someone with a gun on the door. There would always be two ways of it: recover where there is no other option, but support where you can keep an enterprise viable. So that's the one point I wanted to add. As far as financial inclusion, that 50% are still excluded and what is happening, let me just make one very important point. Till 2, 3, 4 years back, the entire inclusion was expected to be achieved through the traditional brick and mortar model of the branches. Clearly, it was impossible to do like that. Now, when so many flexibility is available, banks are allowed to engage the correspondents and all that, you can see that in last 2 years, how the pace has increased. And these are the kind of initiatives, once they take the momentum, with each passing month, the speed would gather, even further momentum.
Thank you.
See, I only want to add, the present NPAs are not because of the poor underwriting standards. It's 40% of nearly is because of the policy logjam and the infrastructural issues and like that. And I'm also equally, I would like to tell you that I'm quite proud that Indian banking system is able to restructure the advances. Let me tell you, the economic value, wealth that is created by the businessmen are being helped by us by hand-holding them. So hardly about 10 to 12% of them only actually turn to NPA. So this factor has to be viewed in the right perspective. Even the restructured advance, very often in the analysis part of it, it's always clubbed with the NPA, and then accordingly the analysis and the rating is given to the banking system, which I feel is need to be viewed in the right perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I've reached my time at 12:45. I thank all the panelists for their very valuable contributions, and for all of you for your patient hearing and the interaction. Thank you very much.